The night I sat down across from Oliver's sister. She had been waiting at that table for 47 minutes. 2 wine glasses, set a basket of bread, untouched, and her phone face down on the white tablecloth like she didn't want to see the screen anymore. I'd known Charlotte for 10 years and never said more than 30 words to her at once. But when I saw her through the restaurant window, with that empty chair across from her, I didn't think about whether I should. I just pulled open the door, walked across the room, and sat down. She looked up at me like I was the last person she expected, and the first person she needed. My name is Dustin. I'm 29, and I run the inventory floor at a warehouse supply company just outside of Portland. Most days, I'm there by 6 in the morning, counting pallets, checking invoices, making sure the stock numbers match what the system says we have. It's quiet work, the kind that lets your hands move while your mind drifts somewhere else, and I've always liked that about it. A missing pallet shows up on the spreadsheet. A crooked label gets caught on the second count. The problems are simple, and the fixes are certain. People don't work like that. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Birch Street. The rent is cheap, the floors creak, and the dryer vents hum through the wall on weekends. It isn't much, but I don't need much. A hot shower after work, a couple of beers on the porch, a phone that doesn't ring after 9. That's been my life for the last 4 years, and I haven't complained about it once because complaining means you expected something different. The one thing that's been steady in my life since I was 19 is Oliver. We met at a summer job loading trucks for a moving company. 2 guys who didn't talk much, but worked the same way, fast and quiet, getting it done without asking for credit. After that summer, we just kept showing up for each other. He's the kind of friend who calls on a Tuesday to ask if you've eaten, not because he's worried about you, but because he's eating, and it felt wrong not to check. I've never had to explain myself to Oliver, and he's never had to explain himself to me. Oliver has an older sister, 3 years older, which doesn't sound like much on paper, but in practice it meant she was always a step ahead. Always the one who graduated first, got the job first, figured out the thing the rest of us were still fumbling through. Her name is Charlotte. She works in marketing for a firm downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and coffee bars and people who say deliverables without laughing. She carries herself like someone who knows what she's doing, and maybe she does. I wouldn't know. I've never been close enough to find out. I've seen Charlotte maybe 15 times in the 10 years. I've known Oliver. Thanksgiving dinners, birthday cookouts, the occasional night at a bar where Oliver dragged me along because he said I needed to get out. More. Each time I noticed her, the way you notice something bright in a room you're only passing through. The way she laughed at something her cousin said. The way she pulled her jacket tighter when the wind kicked up on the porch. The way she looked at her phone and then put it away like whatever was on, it wasn't worth her attention. I noticed all of it, and I never did a thing about any of it. She was Oliver's sister. That was the whole reason. You don't look at your best friend's sister the way I looked at Charlotte, and you sure as hell don't say anything about it. So I didn't. I kept my head down at those gatherings, made small talk when she walked past, and told myself that noticing someone from a distance wasn't the same as wanting them. It's not a lie I believed, but it was one I could live inside of, and that was enough. For 10 years, it was enough. Then one Friday evening in October, Oliver called me. I was on my couch with a plate of leftover pasta, watching a home repair video about fixing a leaky faucet, which is the kind of thing I watch for fun and the kind of thing that tells you everything about how my Fridays usually go. "Hey, you doing anything tonight?" Oliver asked, and I could hear the television on in his background, some game he had half his attention on. "Just the usual," I said. "You need something?" "Charlotte's got a big date tonight," he said, and something in my gut went tight, the way a knot pulls when you step on the wrong end of a rope. Some guy named Roman. She's been seeing him a few weeks. Sounds like it might be getting serious. I set my fork down without meaning to, and I picked it back up before the silence on my end got long enough for Oliver to notice. "That's good for her," I said, and my voice came out even, which was a small victory. "She seems happy about it," Oliver said. "She's been talking about this restaurant, Ristorante Milano, the one on 4th Street with the outdoor patio. Apparently the guy made reservations and everything. I didn't say anything to that. I just made a sound that could have been agreement and let Oliver move on to talking about the game. When we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time with my pasta going cold and the faucet video still playing, and I couldn't get the image out of my head. Charlotte, at a restaurant with candles on the table. Charlotte across from some man named Roman. Charlotte laughing the way she laughed when something surprised her. I hated that I was thinking about it. I had no right to think about it. She was Oliver's sister, and Roman was whoever he was. And I was a guy who counted pallets for a living and hadn't been on a date in 2 years. The math was simple, and it didn't include me. I knew that. But knowing something and feeling it are two different jobs, and that night I couldn't get either one finished. I turned off the television, washed my plate, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the streetlights on Birch and the laundromat sign blinking through the glass, and I told myself to go to bed, to let this go, to stop carrying around something that didn't belong to me. I told myself that for about an hour. Then I picked up my keys. I told myself I was just driving past. Ristorante Milano was on 4th Street, and 4th Street was on my way home from the hardware store, which I'd left an hour ago, but I was pretending I just left. The logic was so thin I could see through it, but I needed something to hold on to, some reason that wasn't the real one. I found a parking spot across the street, and half a block down, my truck angled so I could see the restaurant's front window without being right on top of it. The patio lights were on, strings of those little bulbs that make everything look warmer than it is. Through the glass, I could see the inside, the bar along the back wall, the tables with their white cloths and their small candles. And then I saw her. Charlotte was at a corner table near the window. She was wearing a white dress, something simple and clean, and her hair was down the way I'd only seen it once or twice, not pulled back or styled up, but just falling past her shoulders. There were 2 wine glasses on the table, both poured, and a basket of bread that hadn't been touched. A candle burned between the 2 place settings, and across from her, the chair was empty. I watched her check her phone. She picked it up, looked at the screen, and set it face down on the tablecloth. Then she did it again, 2 minutes later. Then again. Each time she put the phone down a little harder, her jaw a little tighter, her shoulders a little lower. She signaled the waiter once, and he came over and she said something short, probably asking if anyone had come to the front desk looking for her table. He shook his head. She nodded and folded her hands on the tablecloth, and the way she folded them told me she was trying very hard not to look like someone who'd been abandoned. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock on the dashboard the whole time, telling myself to drive home, telling myself this wasn't my business, telling myself that showing up would be the wrong thing, the desperate thing, the thing that would make her feel pitied instead of seen. But then she flagged the waiter again. And this time when he came over, she handed him her credit card, and I watched her reach for her purse, and I knew she was leaving. She was going to walk out of that restaurant alone, with 2 glasses of wine she didn't drink, and a table for 2 that only ever had 1 person at it. And something in me, I didn't decide to move. And I don't remember deciding. I just remember the sound of my truck door closing and the cool October air on my face. And then I was pulling open the restaurant door, and the hostess was asking me if I had a reservation, and I said, "I see someone I know." Charlotte saw me coming. Her eyes went wide, and then narrow, confused, and then almost hostile, like she was trying to figure out if I was there to make things worse. I pulled out the empty chair across from her, and I sat down, and the candle between us flickered from the movement. "Dustin," she said, and her voice was careful. The voice of someone who doesn't want to be caught off guard twice in one night. "I saw you through the window," I said. "Thought you might want some company." She stared at me for a long moment, and in that moment, I could see everything fighting inside her. The pride that wanted to tell me to leave, and the hurt that didn't want to be alone with this anymore. The waiter appeared at my elbow, menus in hand, looking between the 2 of us like he wasn't sure what was happening. "I'll have whatever she's having," I said, and Charlotte's mouth opened slightly, the closest she'd come to a smile all night, though it wasn't quite a smile yet. The first 10 minutes were stiff. Charlotte sat back in her chair with her arms folded loosely. Not hostile, but not open either, watching me the way you watch a stray dog that wandered into your yard. I didn't try to explain myself. I didn't apologize for showing up. I just sat there and drank the wine. The waiter poured and let the silence sit between us until it started to feel like something we were both sharing instead of something she was hiding behind. "Roman's not coming," she finally said, and the words came out flat and factual, like reading a weather report for a town she didn't live in anymore. "I figured," I said. "He texted about 20 minutes ago. Said something came up." That's the whole text. Something came up. 4 words for a night I bought a new dress for. She looked down at the white dress, then back at me. And there was something fierce in her eyes that wasn't anger. It was closer to a kind of determination, like she was deciding in real time not to let this break her. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know you probably just felt sorry for me." "I didn't feel sorry for you," I said, and I meant it. "I saw you sitting here, and I didn't want you to sit here alone. That's not pity, that's something else." Charlotte looked at me for a long time after I said that, and the wall behind her eyes cracked just enough for me to see what was behind it. Then she picked up her wine glass and took a real sip, not the performative kind, and something in her posture shifted. She leaned forward about an inch, and that inch was everything. We started talking, and I don't know how to explain what happened, except that it felt like the room got smaller around us, and the rest of the restaurant just stopped mattering. She asked me how the warehouse was going, and I told her about the new inventory system they'd installed, and she laughed, really laughed, when I described the regional manager trying to scan a barcode with his phone camera like it was going to work. And then I asked her about her job, not the marketing part with the deliverables and the meetings, but the part she actually cared about. And she told me about this campaign she'd designed for a local bakery, how she'd photographed the bread herself at sunrise because the stock photos felt wrong. "Nobody asks me about the bread," she said, and there was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. "They ask about the metrics." "The bread sounds better," I said. She tucked her hair behind her ear when she smiled, and I noticed that the small, specific way her fingers pushed the strand back, and I filed it away the way I file everything about her, quietly and without permission. The check came, and I reached for it before she could. She moved to stop me, and her hand landed on top of mine, her fingers pressing against my knuckles, and neither of us moved for a second. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was just a reach for the same piece of paper at the same time, but the warmth of her skin on mine felt like something I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. "I've got it," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd planned. "You don't have to," she said, but she didn't pull her hand away, right away. She let it rest there for another beat, then lifted it slowly, and the absence of it felt like cold air. We walked out of the restaurant together onto 4th Street. The October air hit us both, and she pulled her jacket tighter. The same gesture I'd seen at those cookouts years ago, and I wanted to offer her my coat, but I didn't, because I knew that would be too much, too fast, too obvious. "Thank you," she said on the sidewalk, and she said it quietly. Not the way you thank a stranger for holding a door, but the way you thank someone for showing up, when showing up, cost them something. "I didn't do anything special," I said. "That's why it matters," she said. And then she turned and walked toward her car. And I stood there watching her go with my hand still warm where she'd touched it. I drove home that night with my window down, and the city lights blurring past, and the strange heavy feeling in my chest wasn't the same hollow I'd been carrying for years. It was something fuller, something that scared me more than emptiness ever had, because full things can overflow, and I wasn't sure I knew how to hold that much without spilling. I went back to work on Monday and counted pallets and checked invoices and kept my hands busy and my mind as far from Friday night as I could push it. It didn't work. The warehouse smelled like cardboard and dust, and the same thing it always smells like. But every time I looked at a shipping label with a Portland address, I thought about 4th Street and the restaurant and Charlotte's hand on mine for those 3 or 4 seconds that lasted a month. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I sat on it the way I've always sat on things, letting the weight of them press down on me until I got used to it. And I told myself that one dinner didn't change the rules. She was still Oliver's sister. I was still the guy who counted pallets. The math hadn't changed, even if the feeling had. Tuesday at the warehouse, Oliver leaned against a shelf while I was counting a shipment of copper fittings and said, "Charlotte's been weird since that Roman thing she's been staying in, not answering calls. She'll bounce back, she always does." He said it the way brothers talk about their sisters, a mix of concern and dismissal that means, I notice something's wrong, but I don't know how to fix it, so I'll just say she'll be fine. I almost told him right there. I almost said, I was there that night. I sat with her. But the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat, because I didn't know how to explain why I'd been at that restaurant without telling him the thing I'd been not telling him for 10 years. So I just nodded and said, "She'll be all right," and Oliver moved on to complaining about the new safety goggles. 3 days passed. 4. I went to work, came home, heated up leftovers, watched my repair videos, went to bed. The apartment hummed with the laundromat dryers, and the phone didn't light up after 9. And the silence was the same silence it had always been. Except now, it felt like something was missing from it, a sound I'd only heard once, and already couldn't stop listening for. On Thursday night, my phone buzzed. Charlotte's name on the screen and a message. "Thank you for that night." I didn't say it right. I read it 4 times. I typed 3 different responses and deleted each one, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard like I was standing at the edge of something and couldn't decide if the fall was worth it. Finally, I wrote back, "You don't owe me anything." Her reply came in under a minute. I know, that's the point. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. She wasn't thanking me for being nice. She was telling me that the thing that mattered wasn't the dinner or the wine or the chair I pulled out. The thing that mattered was that I showed up without a reason, without an angle, without anything to gain, and that was the part she couldn't stop thinking about either. I put the phone on my nightstand and lay in the dark with the dryer humming through the wall, and I didn't sleep for a long time, not because I was restless, but because for the first time in years I had something to look forward to, and the anticipation sat on my chest like a hand I couldn't shake off. The last time I'd felt anything like this, I was 23, and it ended the way most things do when you're 23, badly and with a lot of silence. Afterward, I told myself this wouldn't be like that. I told myself that while the ceiling stared back at me, and the dryer hummed its one-note song, and the not knowing pressed against my ribs like weather coming in, it was Saturday when Charlotte texted again, "Coffee? There's a place near my apartment. No pressure? No pressure." Like she knew I'd been sitting on the edge of this for days and needed a rope to grab onto. I wrote back, named the time, and she said 2 o'clock. And I spent the next 5 hours trying to figure out what to wear to something that wasn't a date but wasn't not a date either, which is the kind of problem I don't usually have, because I don't usually have reasons to care what I look like. The coffee shop was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a shoe repair place, the kind of storefront you walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside there were 4 tables and a counter, and a woman behind the register who looked like she'd been making lattes since before I was born. Charlotte was already at a table by the window. No wine glasses this time. No candles. Just 2 mugs. The woman had sat down like she knew. Charlotte was different outside the restaurant. The dress was gone, replaced by jeans and a green sweater that made her eyes look like they had their own light source. She wasn't sitting up straight the way she had at Ristorante Milano, holding her posture like armor. She was leaned back in the wooden chair, one foot tucked under her, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was something solid she could anchor to. "Thanks for coming," she said. And it wasn't a formality. It was an admission. "Thanks for asking," I said. We talked for 2 hours. About her work, the bakery campaign, a new project for a bike shop that wanted to rebrand. About my warehouse, the new regional manager who couldn't use a scanner, the old forklift that sounded like it was making a wish every time it lifted a pallet. About Oliver when he was 16 and tried to fix his own car and ended up pushing it 3 blocks to a gas station. And we both laughed at that, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone for so long that their failures feel like family stories. Then the conversation went somewhere I didn't expect. She asked me if I'd always worked with my hands, and I told her about my father, how he left when I was 12, and how after that, things around the house just started breaking. The kitchen faucet, the hinge on the back door, the latch on the fence, and my mother couldn't afford a repairman. So I figured it out myself. I told her I learned to fix things, because things around me were always breaking and nobody was coming to fix them. And that felt like the most honest thing I'd said out loud in years. Charlotte listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That explains a lot about you," and I asked what she meant. And she said, "You notice what's broken before anyone else does, and you don't wait for someone else to fix it." I didn't have a response for that, because it was too close to the truth and too close to the reason I'd walked into that restaurant, and I think she knew it because she didn't push. She just picked up her coffee and let the moment sit. Something was shifting between us, and I could feel it the way you feel a storm before it breaks, not in the sky, but in the pressure change, the way the air gets heavy and still. I couldn't name what we were building, but I knew it was real, and real things are harder to walk away from than convenient ones. Then she told me something back. She said she'd always been the responsible one in her family, the one who had the plan, who paid the bills on time, who didn't call home crying because she was supposed to be the one who had it together. And she said the hardest part wasn't the work of holding everything up. It was that nobody ever asked if she was tired. They just assumed she wasn't, because she was Charlotte, and Charlotte didn't need help. I got so used to not needing anyone, she said, that I forgot what it felt like when someone just showed up because they wanted to. The coffee shop closed at 4. The woman behind the counter started wiping down tables with pointed looks in our direction, and we stood up and walked outside into the cold. Charlotte pulled her jacket tighter. Same gesture. And this time, I noticed her hands, bare and red from the October air. She put her hand on my arm just below the shoulder, and the touch was light and deliberate, not accidental. Like the check at the restaurant, she was choosing to touch me, and I felt it through the sleeve of my jacket like a current. "I've known you for 10 years, she said, looking at me directly, not at the ground, not at her phone, not at the traffic going by on the street. And I never really saw you until that night at the restaurant." I didn't say anything, just put my hand over hers where it rested on my arm, and we stood there on the sidewalk outside the closed coffee shop, while the wind came down the street and the streetlights started to buzz on, and the quiet between us felt like the kind of thing you don't fill with words because the words would just get in the way. It was 2 weeks later when it came apart. Charlotte and I had seen each other 4 more times since the coffee shop, dinners at a takeria downtown, a walk along the river on a Sunday afternoon, a night at my apartment where I cooked pasta, and she sat on kitchen chair and told me about her week. We weren't calling it anything. We were just showing up for each other, and that was enough for me, and I thought it was enough for her, but it wasn't enough for secrecy, because secrets don't stay hidden when 2 people keep choosing each other. Oliver found out on a Thursday. Charlotte had stepped out of the room to take a work call, and Oliver was sitting on her couch waiting for her to come back so they could leave for their mother's birthday dinner, and her phone buzzed on the coffee table. He wasn't trying to look. The screen lit up, and my name was on it, with a text about meeting for dinner on Saturday, and he read it because it was right there in front of him, and it didn't make sense. My name on his sister's phone, dinner plans that he didn't know about. He came to the warehouse the next morning. I was in the back, checking a shipment of PVC pipes, when I heard his boots on the concrete floor, and something about the way he was walking, not his usual loose stride, but something stiffer, told me before he opened his mouth. The whole warehouse felt different with him in it, the way a room feels different when someone brings bad news through the door, like the air itself has shifted weight. "My sister," he said, and he stopped about 5 feet away from me, which was farther than he usually stood. "You're seeing my sister and you didn't tell me." It wasn't a question. It was a man trying to fit something into a picture that didn't have room for it, I set the clipboard down. I didn't apologize. I'd spent the whole night rehearsing apologies, and none of them fit, because the truth was, I'd done something that mattered more than the rules of friendship, and I wasn't going to be sorry for it. I was there the night Roman stood her up, I said. I saw her through the restaurant window, and I went inside, and I sat down across from her. Something happened that night, Oliver. Something I can't explain, and I'm not going to take back. His jaw worked, the muscle in his cheek tight. He looked at me, and I could see him trying to hold two things at once, the loyalty to his sister and the loyalty to me, and they were pulling in opposite directions, and neither one was winning. You should have told me, he said. I should have, I said. I didn't know how. He stared at me for another long moment, and then he turned and walked out of the warehouse without another word, and the door banged shut behind him, and I stood there, in the back, with the PVC pipes in the forklift and the smell of cardboard. And I thought about all the years Oliver had been the one fixed point in my world, and how I'd just cracked that foundation wide open. I went home that night and sat in the dark at my kitchen table. The laundromat hummed through the floor. My phone sat on the table between my hands, and I didn't pick it up because there was no one to call. Charlotte would hear about it from Oliver. Oliver wouldn't pick up for me. And I was left sitting in the same silence I'd always sat in, except now the silence had a name and a face and a cost I was still calculating. Charlotte called me the next morning at 7. I was already awake. I'd been awake since 5, lying in bed, looking at the ceiling with the dryer, hum coming through the wall, and the gray light of early morning seeping around the curtains. Oliver told me, she said, and the careful tone she used told me she'd been bracing for this call since last night. I know, I said. There was a pause, the kind of pause where both people are breathing, but neither one is speaking, and the silence holds more weight than words could. Is this real? She asked. Or is this just because I was sitting alone in a restaurant and you felt bad for me? The question landed in my chest like a dropped tool, heavy and exact. I understood why she was asking it. From the outside, it probably looked like pity, like charity, like a man stepping into a gap because the gap was there. But it wasn't that. It had never been that. I noticed you years before that dinner, I said. I noticed you at every cookout, every Thanksgiving, every time Oliver dragged me to a bar where you happened to be. I noticed you and I never said anything because you were his sister, and I thought I wasn't someone you'd notice back. I heard her breath catch on the other end of the line. A small sound, barely there, but I caught it because I catch everything about her. I don't want to be the thing that breaks you and Oliver apart, she said, and there was a tremor in her voice that told me she'd been carrying this worry all night, turning it over the way I turn over problems I can't fix with my hands. I don't want that either, I said, but I'm not going to pretend this isn't happening. I can't do that anymore. She was quiet for a long time after that, and I let her be quiet. Because some things need room to breathe, and I've learned that the hard way, by filling silences too fast and watching the wrong words come out. We should give him space, she finally said. He needs time to figure out how he feels about it. Okay, I said. There was another pause, and in that pause I could hear something I hadn't heard in Charlotte's voice before. A fracture in the composure she wears like a second skin, and it told me this was costing her as much as it was costing me. Then she said one more thing before we hung up, and the way she said it was so quiet I almost missed it, the way she'd almost missed the text that night at the restaurant. I'm not sorry you sat down at that table, Dustin. I held the phone against my ear after she hung up, listening to the deadline, and then I set it on the nightstand and put both hands over my face and just breathed. I didn't know what was going to happen with Oliver. I didn't know what this thing with Charlotte would become. I didn't know if I just traded the one fixed certainty in my life for something that might not last. But I knew that she wasn't sorry, and that was enough to stand on, even if the ground underneath it wasn't solid. Yet 2 weeks passed. I didn't call Oliver. I didn't text. I showed up to work and counted pallets and kept my distance when he was on the floor, and he kept his. She said she wanted to give him room, and I believed her, because Charlotte isn't the kind of person who says something she doesn't mean, even when it costs her. The silence was heavy in a way. The old silence never was. Before Charlotte, the quiet in my life was just empty space, a room with nobody in it. Now the quiet was full of things unsaid, and every empty evening felt like a held breath, like something was waiting to either break or settle, and I couldn't tell which one was coming. The worst part was the not knowing. I'd rather have had Oliver yell at me than this measured distance, because anger at least means the other person still cares enough to burn. Silence just means they're deciding whether you're worth the fuel. On a Wednesday night, I was sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the streetlights flicker on Birch, when a truck pulled up to the curb and Oliver got out. He wasn't carrying anything. He wasn't dressed up. He was just standing on the sidewalk, looking up at me, on the porch, and his face wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. The kind of tired that comes from thinking about something for 2 weeks and finally running out of reasons to keep thinking. "Can I come up?" he asked. I nodded and unlocked the gate, and he climbed the stairs and sat down in the other chair on the porch, and for a minute neither of us said anything. The laundromat hummed below us. A car went by with its headlights on. The beer in my hand was getting warm. "She's different with you," Oliver said. And he said it like it cost him something, like the words were heavy and he'd been carrying them for a while. "I've never seen her like that. She doesn't perform. She's just there. She doesn't hold herself together the way she does with everyone else." I kept quiet and listened. "She came over for Mom's birthday. And she was lighter," he continued. "Not happy in the way she gets when something goes right at work. Lighter like something wasn't pressing on her anymore. I asked her about it, and she said she'd been spending time with someone who didn't want anything from her." Oliver looked at me across the porch, and the streetlight caught the side of his face, and I could see the shift happening, the slow recalculating of a man who'd built a wall and was now deciding whether to take it down. "Are you okay with it?" I asked. "I'm not okay with how you went about it," he said. "You should have told me." "That's not nothing, Dustin. That's trust." "I know," I said. He was quiet again, turning something over, and then he said, "But I'd rather have you in her life than someone like Roman. At least, I know you'll show up." It wasn't a blessing. It was a concession wrapped in honesty. A man setting down something he'd been carrying because the weight wasn't worth what it was costing. It wasn't warm, and it wasn't easy, and it was enough. Oliver stood up and put his hand on my shoulder, brief and firm, the way he does when he means it, and doesn't have the words. Then he walked down the stairs and back to his truck, and I stood in the doorway for a long time after, not moving, just breathing, the same way I stood at that restaurant table across from Charlotte, not moving, just being present for something I'd earned by showing up when it mattered. After that, things settled into something I can only describe as steady. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Not the kind you see in movies with swelling strings and a rain-soaked confession. Just steady, the way a foundation settles after the framing goes up. Slow and quiet and solid. Charlotte started coming to my apartment on weeknights. I'd cook. Nothing fancy. Just pasta with red sauce and a salad from the grocery store, and she'd sit at my small kitchen table with the wobbly leg and eat like it was the best meal she'd had in weeks. Maybe it was, or maybe it was just the first meal she'd had, where she didn't have to be someone impressive. I fixed the hinge on her kitchen cabinet that had been loose for 6 months. She didn't ask me to. I just noticed it when I was standing in her kitchen, waiting for her to find her keys. And the next time I came over, I brought a screwdriver and a replacement pin from the hardware store, and I knelt down on her tile floor and fixed it while she stood in the doorway watching. She didn't say anything while I worked, just handed me the screwdriver when I set the wrong one down, and that small gesture, knowing which tool I needed before I asked for it, undid me more than any grand statement could have. We sat on her porch in the evenings when the weather held, her feet in my lap, my hand on her ankle. The quiet between us. The kind that doesn't need filling. The neighbor's dog barked. Cars went by. The street light at the corner buzzed on. And we just sat there, two people who found each other, because one of them didn't show up, and the other one did. I spent so long trying to be with the right kind of person, she said one night, her voice soft in the dark. The one with the right job, the right apartment, the right plans. I forgot to notice the right person. I didn't have a clever response, and I never do. So I just took her hand and held it, and she leaned her head against my shoulder, and the porch light made a warm circle around us while the rest of the street went dark. The right person isn't the one with the best profile, or the perfect plan, or the reservation at the nice restaurant. It's the one who sits down when you're alone and doesn't leave. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe. There's always another porch, another quiet night, and another story about the kind of love that doesn't announce itself.